I am the postdoctoral fellow for the Center for the Critical Study of Latinx Communities. The center launched in 2023, if you're not familiar, under the auspices of the Latinx Research Center and is funded through the California legislature. Our goal is to document the rich stories of how Latinx social movements, mainly in California, have struggled to confront health inequalities and fight for health justice for Latinx communities. So an ambitious project, but an important one. For this reason, we are so excited to host today's converatorio, in which we hope to highlight the work that Mayor Ray Leon and the city of Huron are doing in addressing systemic inequalities. In terms of format, our conversatorio today will be split into two parts. For the first hour, we will do introductions and allow the mayor to tell us about what the work that he's doing, and in the second part, we will open it up, the space for a dynamic conversation with our panelists, and we welcome and encourage you to participate and to ask questions. So now to introduce our distinguished guests and panelists, I would first like to introduce, and we're honored to welcome back Berkeley alumni, Dr. Sebastián Rubiano Galvis, assistant professor in the International Studies Department at the University of San Francisco. Dr. Rubiano Galvis holds degrees in geography and law from the Universidad de los Andes in Colombia, and in 2022 received his doctorate from UC Berkeley in environmental science, policy, and management. Dr. Rubiano Galvis' work is multidisciplinary and collaborative across the disciplines of science and technology studies, social sciences, environmental science, humanities, and socio-legal studies. And his work is focused on the politics of environmental knowledge, technology, and data in Latin America. His current research centers on the global governance of mercury and the datafication of environmental education, science, and policy. And his work has appeared in Environmental Assessment Review, AMBICS, Teología, Ciencia, Tecnología, and Sociedad, as well as several edited volumes. In addition to much of his academic work, Dr. Rubiano Galvis also consults and collaborates with nonprofit organizations in Colombia, indigenous and human rights organizations across Colombia, Peru, and Brazil. He has also served on the board of the Colombia-based Observatory for Coastal and Marine Governance, and previously worked as research director of environmental justice at the Ecosistia. And he's currently also a research affiliate of the Human Context and Ethics Data Program at UC Berkeley's Division of Computing and Science, Data Science and Society. So thank you to Sebastián for being here today, and I'll pass it over to Professor Briggs.
By the way, in her characteristic, humilde fashion, Carolina Taradera didn't say that she also just received her doctorate in medical anthropology from Berkeley. Yeah! And if you've never heard of what a conversatorio is, I want to tell you, the idea is that we leave here having done something new. It's not just a lecture with a question and answer. It is that we come together to produce new knowledge and new commitments to struggle for social justice. So, tengo el placer y el honor today to introduce two people I admire greatly. First, Dr. Sara Ramirez, currently employed by Per Capita as a senior field researcher, is a researcher, activist, and epidemiologist from the San Joaquin Valley. I don't need to tell you that where that is. It's not the Central Valley, as they usually say on this side of the river. Right? Raised in Pixley, she became a first-generation graduate of UC Davis with a BA in Chicano Studies, subsequently receiving an MA from Arizona State with a focus on community health, a master's in public health from Columbia University, and a PhD in modern health and literature from Stanford, where she also did work on medical anthropology and the critical history of public health. Dr. Ramirez has worked as a health educator for the city of Pixley, a lecturer in the Food and Nutrition and Science Department at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, and a principal investigator in the Public Health Institute in Oakland. The first public health officer for Tulare County, she put racialized health inequities and health justice on the public health agenda in an area where agribusinesses and their allies are more concerned with promoting injustice. During the pandemic, she co-authored two powerful studies on the effects of COVID-19 on farm workers, She was the co-founder of Be Healthy Tulare, a grassroots collective incorporating popular education and participatory strategies to promote health justice. Serving as the executive director of FoodLink, she did more than run a food bank in a region where food scarcity is unconscionably high. She helped to create community gardens and provided cooking and exercise classes. For this work, Berkeley's Institute for the Study of Societal Issues awarded Dr. Ramirez the Thomas I. Tamashita Prize in 2014. It's a tremendous honor to introduce one of the most dedicated, energetic, creative, and far-thinking individuals I have ever met. Mayor Rey Leon's family came to California from Michoacan, his father with the Bracero program. He is of Purepecha descent, and he has conversational ability in the language and is actively engaged in the Purepecha cultural scene in the Valley. For me, Mayor Leon embodies everything that Berkeley stands for, at least should stand for, of social justice and social transformation rather than simply reproduction of privilege. He was born in Fresno, raised in the vicinity of Huron. Now you may know, some of you may know a lot about Huron. Some of you who are not from the area may never have heard of Huron, but by the end of today, Huron's going to be on your map of California. And it's going to have a big star. Mayor Leon is a first-generation college student who developed a dream in high school of attending Berkeley and having a lasting impact on the world. He graduated with a BA in Chicano Studies with an emphasis in public health. Now, these days, researchers note that public health is deeply connected with environmental health and justice. Mayor Leon was on this 2.5 decades ago. His activism focuses on both the deplorable injustices that are endemic to the Valley and on going beyond describing their effects, the effects of racism and racial capitalism, to work to diagnose and challenge their structural roots. One of the most polluted places on the planet, he realized that environmental degradation in the Valley is deeply entwined with inequities of health and housing and employment and rights and more. He founded the Latino Equity Advocacy and Policy Institute, which seeks environmental, economic, and transportation justice, and also pushes institutions in the region to practice principles of racial equity and environmental justice. Now, I'm not going to say any more about his work because that's why we're here, is to listen to him. I want to mention 3 final things. First, a major obstacle to farm worker health in the community is the scarcity of car ownership and an inadequate county public health transportation system, thereby creating obstacles to accessing health services at distant centers. Mayor Leon put together the idea of raiteros, community members who provide rides informally with the use of electric vehicles to forestall air pollution, to create the Green Raiteros program, and I hope we'll hear a lot about it. During the pandemic, the raiteros taught passengers about COVID-19 prevention in a one-on-one, culturally appropriate ways. Second, noting acute problems with infrastructures and services in his hometown and a lack of political will to transform them, he ran for mayor in 2016 and was overwhelmingly elected. Having toured Huron with Mayor Leon, I could attest to the amazing transformations that he has achieved, but again, you want to hear him tell you about them, not me. Finally, a little tiny Google search would reveal that I'm not the only one who's impressed with Mayor Leon. The LEAP Institute, Green Raiteros, and other projects have been featured in places like the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, and a host of California newspapers, radio stations, and television stations. The LA Times comments. And now, as the Biden administration builds its multi-million-dollar blueprint for confronting deep inequities in the transition to green transportation, one of the few places it has to look for inspiration is Huron. We are honored to have Mayor Leon with us today to share his vision, his dreams, his accomplishments, to inspire current UC Berkeley students to themselves become visionary leaders, and accompanied by I think about 24 high school students from Huron. Shout out to you folks.
Who's from Huron? Raise your hand.
All right.
Oh.
To to continue that crucial work of creating bridges between Huron and other under-resourced California communities to our campus. Welcome.
Gracias. Thank you. That's like a book right there.
There you go.
Y si me permiten, antes de comenzar, quiero decirle, recordarle que somos el Centro para el Estudio Crítico de la Salud de las Comunidades Latinas. Esto no hubiese sido posible si no tenemos ayuda de la legislatura y también si no tenemos ayuda de LRC, del centro que nos cobija a todos. Queremos darle las gracias por estar aquí a todos y bienvenidos, y espero que sobre todo los estudiantes de Huron que hayan disfrutado su tour, estaban muy bien, muy interesados y tenían ¿cómo se dice? Un guía fabuloso, que era el mismo Rey León que les dio el tour como exalumno, acompañado de Nancy y Jimena, uno de los estudiantes acá, y todo el grupo, una colaboración hermosísima. Muchas gracias por eso, y sin más, entonces dejamos a nuestros panelistas que hablen de su experiencia.
Gracias, doctora Clara Montini Grace.
Bueno, eso es mi nombre.
¿Dónde comenzamos?
Hola.
Comenzamos.
All right. Pues buenas tardes. Good afternoon, everybody. It's good to see a lot of folks here. I see my friend Dan Kalb from Oakland City Council, running for Senate, by the way. But you know, we worked together when we were starting the Central Valley Air Quality Coalition. He was with United Concerned Scientists, Union of Concerned Scientists. So the struggle, it's always in having allies, you know, always having a diversity of perspectives and of disciplines, and you know, coming together with one goal and understanding the focus is about human dignity, you know, and that's where I base my work, you know. And my father, as was mentioned by Dr. Briggs, came from Michoacan, 14-year-old orphan with no documents, undocumented, to Huron, 1951, the same year that Huron would become a city. And you know, he went from, in 57 he became a bracero. He was too young to be a bracero at 14. So in 57 he became a bracero, rushed to the village, our ancestral village in Michoacan, married my mom, brought her to the Valle Mexicali, where we have numerous generations of family, because of when they opened the tierras, the ejidos, a lot of gente came to El Valle. But anyhow, those are my roots, you know, the farm worker roots, and growing up with my dad telling me, you know, when, because in the 70s he would become a small businessman. He'd have a restaurant with a bar, and I'll hang out with him, and he would point at, during the chuga season, when the farm workers would be coming into the restaurant, he'll point at them, mira, fíjate, date cuenta que ese soy yo. So reminding me of who we are, right? It's not them or the farm workers, that's us, you know. And so I think that really helped and really solidified my roots and my base of my identity. I always knew I was from Michoacan, you know, I always knew I was Mexicano, you know, but I was always proud also of being, you know, de California, and I was a Boy Scout, so I was always, you know, patriotic también. So, and be prepared was our motto. So anyhow, you know, pero siempre, you know, growing up in Huron, Huron is recognized as one of the poorest cities in the state of California. You Google it and you'll see it, and for me it's kind of like, you know, there's a lot of work to do, you know, but the work that I do out there, it's not just, you know, to set it up and improve the quality of life of my people, but also to give the example. I call them pilots, right? And that helps me get fed. I need to get fed and make the example, right? Yeah, we want to pilot this and that. So that we could, you know, really model what is possible and what can happen. You know, with the Green Raiteros, you know, part of the inspiration there is, you know, as a kid with my mom, you know, we're trying to go to Fresno because I had a primo that was dying. He was in a car crash, a migrant farm worker, and they couldn't attend to his injuries because he had valley fever. You know, that's something endemic in the valley, in Coachella, a lot of our valleys, you know, and so we would go out there with a tío who was a raitero, He had a little pinto car, tall man, big sombrero. Like I always refer to that cartoon, that book with that little changuito and that tall skinny guy with the sombrero. That's kind of like my tío, the tiny little car. Yeah, so I always forget the name. But anyhow, so one day my tío wasn't available to give us a ride. It was the last day when my primo was basically, they were going to pull the plug because they weren't able to take care of the valley fever to take care of his injuries. And so all the raiteros were gone. And we had to take the bus. And the bus took 3 hours from Huron to get to Fresno. And so it's like what it takes for us to get from Huron to LA in the car, right? And so those challenges exist with a lot of our communities, our rural communities, our farm worker communities, be it in Monterey County, in San Joaquin Valley, Coachella Valley, Imperial Valley. It's existed forever, and it's really never been resolved. Because early on, I would advocate at the county level before I was mayor. Now I'm on the board of the county level, and sometimes colleagues are allies, sometimes they're not. But, they would say, oh, it's too expensive, it's too expensive. So for them, it's too expensive because they don't value the life of the farm workers that are providing the food. I say hashtag food chain keepers, right? And that, to me, should be more than enough value to put down the resources to make something happen, right? Well, they never did. So, with that experience as a child with my mom, that experience of them not having the creative or the innovative or, the ability to really make something happen for farm workers, for geographically isolated communities, linguistically isolated communities. My mom got cancer. And so I would have to take her to the doctor in Bakersfield. It's an hour and a half from here. And so, that was problematic in the days when, because I'm the youngest of 7 siblings, el más chico. It's like when I became mayor, ¿usted es el mayor? No, soy el más chico. But I'll take my mom, but when I wasn't there, when I was out of the state or out of whatever country, she'll call me on nerviosa, pues no sé qué me va a llevar. Stressful, bad for health. Stress, financial stress, it's a poison in our communities. You can't have a good quality of life unless you have the resources to be able to at least sustain the basics. Right? That's our challenge on a daily basis. So I started thinking about it, and then when I started hearing about plug-in vehicles coming through and all that, I went to the city because they had 2 hybrid vehicles, and I told them, hey, because they told me, oh, we just use them to get the mail, So I went, hey, well, why don't we use them to get raiteros, train them, then set up a program through the city to take the families to their medical appointments. They weren't interested. Oh, no, we don't want to deal with the liability. And I was like, all right. So that's where the idea, the first article was in June of 2014. And the title was, the Central Valley, it's really the San Joaquin Valley, was ride sharing long before Uber. Then later on in the New York Times, they called me the anti-Uber. LA Times last year, front page, if you guys caught it, that just, further highlighted the program. And supposedly Biden was looking at it. I think we need to throw some rice to pull their attention to really look at it with some funds, right? Anyhow, so and seeing my mom going through those stressors, and in paz descanse, she passed away in 2021. I started really working on this idea. I brought together, whenever I organized in a community, I would always put together a comité. I would always tag them all, Comité Alma, Avance Latina por un mejor ambiente. Good acronym, huh? I learned acronyms here in Brinkman. So some people call me the king of acronyms. But so every community I work in, there's a comité. Because you gotta have the grassroots, participation in it. Because you're not gonna do what you want. You start where the people are, right? And so it turned out that most of my comité members in Huron, Comité Alma Huron, most of them were raiteros. They're the people que se la pasaban, hablaban con todos, se conocían a todos. And then I told them about the idea that, yeah, let's do it. Y pues I comenzó talking to the agency. It took me 2 years to finally get some capacity support. Then the following year, the CPUC, had there was a lawsuit on one of the energy companies and then another company acquired that energy company, but in doing so, because of the energy crisis that had a huge impact on the state of California, they had social responsibility. So the attorney that was the intermediary was a friend of mine. And part of it was they had to fund a pilot EV rideshare project. Hey, pues, I was the only guy talking about it. Don't be scared to talk about your dreams, no matter how impossible you think they may be. Because if you don't seek it, if you don't fight for it, it's not gonna happen. You know, the dream's just the beginning. You know, you gotta put in the work. And you know, we're some workers, right? We feed the country, we feed the world, right? We're some workers, and we just gotta focus on what's gotta get done so that our people are healthy, strong, and safe, right? And as a mayor, that's the way I see it. You know, sanos, seguros, y fuertes, right? So anyhow, so I got the first amount of resources, set up a shop, took an empty shell of a shop, you know, put in a 2-story office space, 10 EV chargers, you know, did some more work, got more EV chargers. Today, Huron has the most EV chargers per capita in the country for a city. You know, and we got 4 DCE fast chargers that we're gonna also install. So, you know, it's nomás echándole ganas, ya después te das cuenta, caray, I did all that, or we did all that, right, más bien. But echándole ganas, right? And so no, it's a very successful program. It's gone for 4,000 miles per month of travel. And we got a couple of our raiteros right here. Let me just recognize them. We got Michael, we got Farita. Oh, and we got Maribel too. You know, it's gone from 4,000 miles a month to 16,000. Right now, we're talking to Coachella. We're gonna acquire 15 Teslas, you know, and in Pájaro we got another grant, so we're gonna expand it there in Monterey County. And the way I see it is like Coachella. There's a town called Mecca. It's like, but I see it like a Huron in the desert. Then I see Pájaro like a Huron near the coast. You know, for me they're all Hurons. You know, because that's a reality. You know, of what's going on. It's the same thing, just a different space, right? So anyhow, it's going well with our GR. We're still working on it. We want to ideally take it, you know, statewide wherever there's campesinos, you know, and make that happen. So that's one of the projects. There's a bunch of other cool projects that I could talk about too, but I don't want to take up the whole time.
Bueno, continúe. O queremos, vamos a darle un aplauso porque lo que ha hecho. ¿Quieres continuar, Sara?
So, as I mentioned earlier, I'm Sara Ramirez. I live in an unincorporated town in the San Joaquin Valley named Pixley. This is the town I grew up in. It's the town that I continue to live in. And it's a town where I've done a lot of work, mostly around food system and food justice, but also to really elevate the health disparities of our community. As you heard, I've worked as an epidemiologist. I was the first epidemiologist of Tulare County, or the first person in that role, to actually begin to map the social determinants of health, right? To look at indicators about what might be producing the disparities that we saw in our communities. Now, it's one thing to live and grow up in these communities, like the young people from Huron, you know what it's like to live here. But sometimes you have to really begin to, I'll say, use the data, make the case, prove some of these challenges. And this is something like what Ray has done in terms of elevating. He's being very modest. He's not even talking about some of the projects that are to come in terms of the food, the sustainable ag projects that you're working on, which I think you should really share as well, right? But I mean, part of what I think we're here to talk about really is how do we get more young people interested in coming back to the Valley and making these changes? Because I'll tell you now, even though I focused a lot on health disparities and food justice and trying to get our communities involved, we also know that, you know, we're starting to get a little on the older side over here.
A little bit.
And we don't have the energy or time as much as we used to. And I bring this up because now a lot of my focus is really turning to the idea of how do we as activists take care of ourselves? Because we've seen the generation before us work themselves to the bone. And you know what? We haven't made as big of a difference as we want. The challenges are still out there, and maybe we even have new challenges and bigger challenges. So I say that too about how do we also learn to take care of ourselves in the struggle as we do this work. And so that's something, Ray and I have known each other for a very long time. And more recently, those are the kinds of conversations that we're also having. At the same time that we're taking care of our community, at the same time that we're trying to bring attention to these disparities, how do we also make sure that we are prepared for our elder years, or we are able to take care of ourselves, give ourselves the time when we also get sick, when we are far away, living in our communities, as you heard. We don't have the access to all the medical care facilities in our communities, and we are going to need those. So in a way, these challenges, my parents were farm workers. I saw my family members die and become disabled due to diabetes. And I saw those things at a really young age, and they left an impact on me. So we get involved in this work because that's what we're passionate to change. And then at the same time, we also know que pues ya vamos también nosotros, right? So it's like these ideas of creating a healthy community. It is a human right for our community, for the generation to come, y para nosotros que ya vamos para allá también. So this idea of how do we build these resources, create the infrastructure that's needed. On that note, I really think that you should talk a little bit more about some of the projects that you're anticipating, because I think that that's something here. Green Raiteros is a wonderful resource, but what's coming next? What are you seeing for the city of Huron?
So I'm here with two hats. You're the Latino Equity Advocacy and Policy Institute, doing a bunch of stuff there. Green Raiteros is part of that. Always newspapers try to put it as part of the city, but no, they had the opportunity, they didn't do it. So, and then my mayor's hat, right? But under the mayor's hat, one of the important things is that the community should have everything that the people need. It should be safe to walk, to cross the street, to not get hit and killed, right? Which has happened on our main street. We have State Route 269 going through our city. It's 5 lanes. The middle is a turning lane, but the two other lanes, always diesel trucks right now. You'll hang out and you'll be watching about 5 tomato trucks will pass by in a matter of like 20 minutes. Or más, actually. In a matter of 5 minutes, you'll see 5 tomato trucks. And I was talking to a farmer yesterday, he says, yeah, if you got 5 things of ketchup, one of them is Huron tomatoes. So no matter, today you're eating pizza, you're tasting Huron, a little bit. The good part of that pizza, Huron. So, and so there's a lot of richness, but there's a lot of absence of the necessary amenities that we take for granted here, like here in Britain. There's no sessions to teach you about mindfulness or, yoga or this exercise or that exercise. The gym is too expensive. It's like, and there's no trails to go on the walk and, enjoy, also, space with your family, so there's just a lot of things that are missing, right? But one of the victories that from early on is a plaza, which I identify, so that it can be understood by planners, designers, probably policymakers, with the tagline that I believe I coined, a multimodal, culturally relevant pedestrian refuge. So the nerds could grasp it. And so a plaza, right? Because you said plaza, what kind of plaza? Whatever. But anyhow, so we got the money for it, and I got pushback actually from my council. Sometimes you got to fight your own folks sometimes, to make things happen, So anyways, that's coming up, and that's going to have, just a cultural space where it will provide the opportunity for social cohesion, where all the familias could be getting together. I tell my folks in the city at our events, I go, Huron might be a city, but more importantly, es una familia hecha de muchas familias. Yeah? And so the plaza va a ser la sala, right? One of the first things that I was able to do early on when I was walking the street, knocking on doors, there was some neighborhoods that were pitch dark. At one house, I knocked on the door, and this familia, they had a female student, who had to wait on the corner. And during the fall and winter, it was a pitch black corner because the light was not functioning, and it had been years. And so she told me that story, and I said, man, that's a huge safety concern. special needs, female student. And so right away when I became mayor, I, got on the horn with PG&E, bunch of phone calls, bunch of emails. They said, oh yeah, we could. I told them, hey, the light don't work. You guys need to fix it. Matter of fact, put an LED light. Matter of fact, there's these other lights that aren't working, do those. Matter of fact, just change them all to LED, right? And so I pushed and pushed and ended up doing it like within a few months rather than they wanted to wait like a year, 2 years. I said, no, you gotta be, like fuerte, dejarte. Don't say, oh, okay, all right, thank you. Well, in 2 years, oh no, this has come up in 2 more years. So then, así nos quieren many times. I've seen it. I've dealt with it. And you can't allow it to happen. Como dijo Martin Luther King Jr., what is it? A delay of justice is, ¿cómo? No sé, right. Who gets a free slice of pizza?
Justice somewhere is injustice everywhere.
No.
Way is justice enough.
That's all. My boy Dan Cal, baby, running for Senate. So that's exactly it. We can't allow that. You gotta be, you gotta be. Nah, you gotta just be strong. No se dejen, I guess is the best way to put it. So anyways, so the whole thing for me was like bright streets are safe streets. Okay, so if there's lights, then people will walk to the store. If there's no lights, todo el mundo quiere manejar, right? But if there's lights, people walk, there's organic cameras on the streets, it makes it safer, right? Y les dije yo, pues ya you like that one, ya con luz, échense su cena, van a caminar a la plaza, van a encontrar a sus compadres, comadres, sus parientes, los abuelos, sea lo que sea, y van a hacer exercise. Ya pueden caminar a la tienda, like that you don't waste gas, you don't pollute, you exercise, everybody's got to walk more, I know I do, and so making it more walkable. Part of it is also through, as a mayor, we solidified some monies to put in bike lane infrastructure. Pueblitos campesinos, we really don't see that. I'm gonna have a class 4 bike lane on the state route. I think we're probably the first city to have a class 4 bike lane on the state route. In all my crosswalks, we're gonna have some more, but everyone's gonna have a pedestrian controlled lighting system. Like incorporated city, or not even a city, but I see it like a Huron in the desert. Then I see Pájaro like a Huron near the coast. For me, they're all Hurons, because that's a reality, of what's going on. It's the same thing, just a different space, right? So anyhow, it's going well with our GR. We're still working on it. We want to ideally take it, statewide wherever there's campesinos, and make that happen. So that's one of the projects. There's a bunch of other cool projects that I can talk about too, but I don't want to take up the whole time. Like invasive species, right? But because I was calling it the Huron Pino Park, but now I'm saying, all right, well, we got a grant from National Park Services, a technical assistance grant. Cal Poly Pomona has a landscape architecture studio that's coming on board, helping us out. San Francisco Academy of Arts got the same, the studio, coming on board in the spring. And so we're gonna engage the community. We're gonna plan out those 3,000 acres. What does it look like in terms of trails, in terms of jobs, building those trails, picnic, areas, bird watching stations, conserving the native species, providing jobs to take out the invasive species. O sea, if you're not solving 3 problems, you're probably creating a problem in one of your efforts, right? In this case, we're doing environmental justice, right? Climate justice. Environmental justice because we're gonna be sequestering, and climate justice, we're gonna be sequestering a lot of carbon. And then in California, you can account for that carbon as credits. That's feria, right? We're going to be empowering a space to further recharge the underground water aquifer, right? Something important in a drought-stricken area, right? We're going to be creating the jobs, of building the trails, of doing all that other work, of invasive species removal, planting the native species, the community garden, which I think Sarah was kind of hinting at. We built 1 greenhouse, we're building 3 more in 3 different towns, farm worker towns, and we're going to grow native species. So de ahí podemos agarrar, and in the process engage students. Now I'm hoping I could inspire some of the high school students, middle school students we brought today so that they can volunteer at the community garden, right? And so that we could build out this space that's gonna be very healthy because people are gonna be able to walk it, bike it, right? And there's gonna be a pathway from the plaza to that space. right? What other piece is it? So when working with a community college, a local community college, I'm telling them, hey, start a program. So like that, we could get kids in your program of forestry, and then they get a job, hands-on internships at the nature, Huron Hawk Nature Conservancy, that's a new name. And I'm identifying people, pulling them in, I'm calling them commissioners, because you gotta fake it till you make it, right? And so that they could get hands-on, and then they could transfer to UC Merced or Humboldt, the places where there's forestry programs. Right now, a lot of the forestry people at the national and state level, they're baby boomers, they're retired. And you go out there, there's really no raza, I'm saying, let's put some brown into that green, right? And opportunities for good jobs. Those are great jobs, right? And so you need to establish launching pads so that you can give the opportunities to the children in the community and the interest and curiosity so that they could feed on just the science and just all of what's happening there so that they could be inspired and say, you know what, I want to go to school. Maybe they change their mind and don't do forestry. Hey, we got them on campus, right? And they're doing it, right? And so I think there's just so much work. And the way I'm saying is that this is an environmental justice community. Ultimately, I've planted like 300 trees so far, 1 per 22 residents. I'll plant another 100 in early next year. You guys want to help plant them? Let me know. Come on through. So we do a carne asada and everything. so it's so sequestering carbon, cooling the streets, right? Also, we're the first city, one of the first cities before San Francisco actually, to establish a gray water ordinance. So new homes that are built, family homes, they have to come gray water ready. Multi-unit developments have to have a full-fledged gray water system. What that means is that the water will keep the trees alive, because during the drought, we were set at 25% allocation, meaning of the 100% of water that we were getting, they cut it 75%. So then it was illegal to water your trees. A lot of trees died. We can't afford to have trees die in the time when the heat waves are just gonna get worse. We need more trees, not less trees. We need those canopies to cool the neighborhood, cool the streets, cool the homes, so you save money on PG&E. And the raza, they're farm workers, right? If you don't want to use potable water to water your trees, if you could use a gray water, you're saving money. Pocket, people, planet, right? And so everything has a connection, And so, yeah, it's on and on and on and on. But I don't know, I guess I'll stop there and later on with questions.
Now we have the pleasure of having Sebastián Rubiano.
Well, thanks so much. I want to start by thanking Carolina and Clara and the Center for the invitation, and the panelists, Professor Briggs, Mayor John, and Dr. Ramirez. It's really a pleasure to be here and learn from you all. Hearing what Mayor Leon was talking about this initiative and Huron being an environmental justice initiative, that gives me the cue to share a story or just share an example of my own work and use that as a pretext to ask Mayor Leon a question about what it means to live and be the mayor of a community that needs to not only fight structural inequalities and forms of violence, but also, the stigma of being called, as I saw that Fresno County was deemed recently one of the most polluted areas of the state due to air quality. So I just want to share a little bit about my own work. I am going to take you very far from California. I did my research in Colombia. There's an activity that it's artisanal and small-scale gold mining is an activity that around 20 million people in the world rely on. Colombia is one of the countries where this is an activity that still provides a livelihood for at least 1 million people. And I happened to do my research about the problem of mercury use in artisanal gold mining, which, as you know, mercury is a naturally occurring element. It's very toxic. If you are exposed to it, your body is going to suffer a lot, probably for the rest of your life. And I was interested in learning how is it that mercury became a priority for Colombia's environmental policy. You may not be aware of this, but 10 years ago, the United Nations signed an international treaty on mercury. It was, the first international effort to regulate and address the whole life cycle of a pollutant at the global level. So in my research, I was interested in learning how is it that that came to be? How is it that one single pollutant got so much attention, and what has that meant for the people who still rely on its use for getting a livelihood? So that took me to many places. That took me to the halls of the UN in Geneva. That took me to the offices of the Ministry of Environment in Bogota. But that also took me to a variety of communities in the heart of the Colombian Andes who are still working on artisanal mining. And among the many things that I learned and that I was able to better understand about this question that I'm talking about was the stigma of having to be named or considered the most polluted town with mercury in Colombia and of the world. So very similar as to like it happened here in Fresno County. In 2011, a team of scientists from the UN went to this town called Segovia in the Colombian Andes, where I did part of my research, and measure mercury levels in air and also in people's bodies. They took samples of urine and blood and the typical work that toxicologists and public health specialists do. And they just found that the mercury levels were like 1,000 times higher than the World Health Organization standard. I mean, it was really outrageous. The amount of pollution and toxic legacies that the people of Segovia have had to endure for more than 2 centuries, it was unprecedented. But bear in mind that this is also a town that has 30,000 people, and most of them were internally displaced people fleeing the internal war, the internal civil war in Colombia, from other parts of the country. Most of them were women who are literally just speaking up, mining tailings that have been already processed by larger operations, and using mercury in the process of doing that. Mercury, for those of you who don't know, it's very useful to separate gold from other non-valuable ores. The time in which you could mine nuggets of gold that are the size of a tennis ball are gone. Now you have to dig deeper and deeper, and methods like mercury amalgamation help you do that. So on top of all these structural forms of violence and marginalization that folks in Segovia had to face, I was also puzzled by this very catastrophic statement of this being the most polluted town of the country. So I talked to people, I talked to the mayor, I talked to physicians in the town, I talked to mayors and the mayor to miners, I'm sorry. And it was really clear that these statements have effects on the ground. I mean, they elicited feelings of shame, of stress, of anxiety. And the most problematic thing is that it immobilized people. It further eroded the lack of trust in public officials, and in this case, for other reasons, in scientists and other people who were coming in and trying to convince miners to not use mercury. So, this is, I feel like, another layer of complexity that places that are characterized in those terms need to face. So even though this is a very different context and it faces very different challenges, I'm curious to hear more and ask Mayor Leon to elaborate a little more about what it has meant to fight these narratives of living in one of the places that is considered one of the most polluted, Fresno County more broadly, and in what ways can communities that are characterized by these statements, fight back and regain control of the narrative? What has been, your experience? I mean, you mentioned a couple of media outlets, you mentioned fighting your own people in the city council, but I was hoping you could tell us a little more about what's the challenge of regaining control of the narrative when your community is facing, these structural forms of violence, and then the stigma of being, named as such.
Mm-hmm. So I think part of it is just painting the picture, with a story. And so people could kind of get it, with the whole thing of, being able to walk to the plaza. Everything in here is walking distance. So walk to the plaza and see your relatives, the elders sitting in the benches, maybe the kids, in the kiosco practicing their instruments. Just painting the picture of what we could have and what that means, what the feeling would be, In regards to air quality, I started working on air quality policy in 2002. And as a co-founder of Central Valley Air Quality Coalition, we're able to get some of the biggest victories that have come through for the San Joaquin Valley in air quality. And Dan was there, and some of those pleitos where we had to sue the air district, and but a lot of it had to do with really going out there to communities and really catching up people and learning from them of what was going on in the neighborhood. So early on, my job was going to cities throughout the San Joaquin Valley, from San Joaquin County all the way to Kern County, and talking to familias, engaging over 300 people. Most of them, well, all of them campesinos, most of them moms, you know, really talking about asthma, you know, air quality, the status of it, you know, because nobody knew what PM was, particulate matter. But we called it polvito maldito, you know, because the other term was a little technical, you know, it's easier, you know, to identify it that way. We talked about pesticides, which in the valley, pesticides is a huge issue. Not something that I've always worked, you know, on directly, and also water quality. Again, you know, something that other colleagues have taken on. But in terms of the air quality, you know, and focusing on the air district, the first thing is that we had to kind of like have the plática with the people so that they could be caught up and they're thinking about it, they're seeing it, because every time you ask, who's got asthma? Or who knows somebody with asthma in their family? Everybody, you know, probably like just a couple of folks out of 30, you know. And during this time when we started that work, the asthma with Latino children was skyrocketing, you know. And so we were able to be successful in just hitting the agency that's supposed to protect the people from air pollution, and we just got a lot of media coverage. You know, the media coverage really blew up in a way where the Fresno Bee ended up focusing a whole report on the air quality. So when that happened, this report that later they would get like a national award on, you know, that animó a políticos, you know. Senator Dean Flores stepped up at the time and proposed 10 Senate bills, you know, proposals, legislature, which, you know, propuestas de ley. And one of them was striking the exemption that Ag had from the very get-go when the Clean Air Act was established in California. You know, that fight was a big one, because then we pulled from all those gentes, from all those communities, and they were part of the process of changing the law. You know, that was really good. But one thing that I realized, you know, recently is that agriculture still is exempted in terms of particulate matter, you know, in the valley. And so I do less policy nowadays, but we have a program where we have air quality monitors on the west side of Fresno County and throughout Kings County. And so we've been monitoring, and we noticed that in this community, 5 Points, if you guys are familiar, there's an elementary school called Westside Elementary School. And we have an air quality monitor there. We started noticing that it was like just consistently kind of, you know, up there, right? So we went to go check it out, and it turns out that there's a dairy next door that's expanding. And but they're exempted. So in engaging the air district, there's nothing that they can do. So I'm thinking, you know, that's something that we, like, very recent, that we got to get back on. And I'm thinking, well, there should be at least a buffer. You know, like, we've been successful, colleagues have been successful in creating buffers so that when they spray pesticides, it's at least 3 miles out. You know, so that, because it's happened over and over again, even after it happens, they say, oh, it won't happen again. And it happens again, right? Where they spray and the drift gets into the community, people's eyes are hurting, their heads are hurting, they can't breathe. It's terrible, you know, it's inhumane, right? And so the struggle is always there, and why we need folks to go back home, because we're really outnumbered, you know, in terms of the capacity to be able to do the work that needs to get done. So. There's another point I want to make, but I think you want to share something.
Well, I was just going to say, you know, in the spirit of this idea of converatorio, you know, I want to be able to, like, take this topic of stigma and let's talk about it a little bit more. Because, you know, for years, like even when I was working on my own dissertation with farm workers and looking at policy change through the San Joaquin Valley, I was talking with farm workers, you know, at that time, who said, I want to change the image that people out there have of us as farm workers, right? Because already when we think of farm workers, we have an image in our head. Now, those of us who are children of farm workers, we've also internalized those images. We've also internalized those beliefs. Sometimes our parents contribute to that stigma as well, right? So I had a dad who didn't believe I would ever go to college, right? And he actually said to me, he didn't know what would happen first. If I would get pregnant, I would get married, but I would never go to college, right? And so we think about those things, how we internalize those messages of like living in the worst place of the nation in terms of air quality, living in poverty. What does that mean, right? And we need to begin to think about ways to decolonize our own thinking and our frame, unlearning the things that we learn, sometimes from our very own families and our parents. So how do we begin to raise that level of consciousness, even back home? Because our communities are the ones that are absorbing those messages too. If you feel so powerless, right? If you feel like, you know, that there's nothing that can be done, that this, you know, the environment is so far gone, then there's little motivation to want to do anything. And we also have to think about how that decolonizing and that unlearning process also means shifting the narrative from blaming the individual to really thinking about the institutions and the systems, right? So how do we begin to open up that dialogue so that that stigma doesn't feel so hurtful and doesn't feel so personal? We begin to look at it as, you know, a downstream effect of the structural changes that need to happen. And I think that that's part of this idea of, you know, are we even conscious of the stigma that we're absorbing? And in what ways, or when do we actually become conscious of that? Because what we do is we actually normalize it most of the time. We hear it, it happens, we normalize it. And sometimes, somewhere down the line, maybe it shifts for us. And we realize, but how do we get that to happen earlier? How do we get that to happen so that we can create policy change in communities that have been overlooked, underfunded, totally ignored for decades? And the impact that it's made on our communities. Do you know how many times I heard that because I was a Mexican kid and my dad had diabetes, that was gonna be my destiny too? Or doctors who would say to my mom, why are you worried about your daughter's weight? All you Mexican people like your kid's fat. Right? Those are the messages that we absorb. Now, how do we begin to unlearn that? And that's, I think, how we begin to address the stigma. But how do we do that at a massive, at a community scale? It has to happen with individuals, of course. But we need it to happen at a community level, too.
Let me give some example. You want to talk?
I wanted to ask a question. Go ahead.
Okay, but I want to, with regard to the stigma, as a physician, you know, you find people like Sarah was telling you, you go to the doctor and the doctor say, well, you know, it's because they are Latinos. It's because they are, you know, they believe in el susto, they believe in the shaman, they believe. I haven't worked here as a doctor, but I work in Venezuela with ethnic group, different ethnic group. And, you know, something that was horrible in my experience, one of my first experience being a doctor in the jungle, it was that I got my first patient that have diarrhea, a little boy, you know, it was really dehydrated, and I took it and ran to the hospital. You know, the healthcare in Venezuela is free, but it's not absent that this stigma that she is talking. And one of my colleagues, you know, I go there and then said, with all the excitement, hey, I need to save this kid. Look at this is important. And some of my colleagues that studied with me, or sometimes I knew them from the community, they absorb this mentality and they say, but Clara, this is the normal diarrhea that kill the children in this time of the year. And piensen en eso, porque cuando un profesional. Incluso hemos visto, my partner and I working, y supuestamente constructores, ingenieros que van a construir viviendas para los pobres con una mentalidad de que no, ellos no van a agradecer, no sirven. Entonces, en un río, en una parte donde es una isla, ya saben que las islas están rodeadas de agua por todas partes, llueve intensamente en la selva. What those people do? Put this, ¿cómo se dice? Cartón, piedra,
Particle board.
particle board. You know, it's the more humiliating thing. I'm really glad to hear that the mayor is thinking in the water to go to irrigate the trees and take advantage of this. But this is the problem with all the poor people, all the brown people and black people around the world. It's not only here. And my message is not only for you, like Sarah said, to change the mentality of your own family, but you will be the next professional. You will be the relevo, la generación de relevo. Y ustedes tenemos que empezar a luchar contra ese estereotipo de todas clases que nos inunda la mente y realmente nos convierte en parte de un sistema que oprime a nosotros y nos mantiene debajo. Pero como dijo Rey León, el mayor, no hay que dejarse, hay que luchar contra eso. Y los estudiantes de Huron que están cansaditos porque están aquí desde muy temprano, yo quiero que brindarles un aplauso, por favor, vamos a aplaudir porque son unos héroes. No es que estamos terminando, solamente quiero despertarlo y decirles que apreciamos.
Nos falta una hora.
Sí, entonces quiero también decir que tenemos que pensar en eso. Vamos a ser los futuros profesionales y no queremos sustentar este estigma. Entonces ya tiene la palabra Dr. Briggs.
I just want to ask a question. This has been so amazing. I've learned so much. But all right, so the mayor is from Huron. Sara is from Pixley. Dr. Clara Montini Briggs, the co-director of the Center for the Critical State of the Health of Latinx Communities, is from a little town you've probably never heard of, Huron, Carabobo, Venezuela. Under-resourced in these three course examples is like a word that falls far short of the reality. So as you began to talk about what were for the three of you some of the obstacles and forms of stigma that you faced, how did you stand up to those? How did you push your way through an educational system? And how is it that you didn't sell out with all of the temptations to become a rich doctor, to be able to get a nice job where all of a sudden we weren't confronting these problems every day? How did you stay in the struggle? Tell us about, if we could get a story from each of you, how did you make that decision? So that also maybe some of the students who are facing some of their own struggles about coming up against those kind of obstacles and forming their own dreams and getting the dedication to be able to follow it through might learn from your examples.
Who wants to start? Who wants to begin?
You are the mayor.
You know, I mean, just my roots, you know, honoring my jefito, my jefita, and my parientes, and just knowing our story, right? And being campesinos, for me, campesino is critical. And being the food chain keepers of the nation, it's a value that's got to be recognized. You know, during the pandemic, they're talking about, you know, all of a sudden they're saying what were they? What was that one phrase?
Essential workers.
Essential workers. I'm thinking all of a sudden he's just calling essential workers, but yet they weren't providing the resources so that the farm workers could be healthy and safe, right? Even when there's forest fires, you got the campesino, the sky is red, and they're in the field still working. The pandemic, they're still going shoulder to shoulder in the field, in the cars, piled up. You know, I was out there with máscaras. I gave out so many máscaras, they started calling me mis máscaras, you know? Even though I'm a Blue Demon fan, not think that. So no, it's the fact that when people start feeling comfortable with being devalued, You know, as a mayor, I'm always saying in the Cámara with the Council of Governments, I'm always reminding folks that no, the farm workers are deserve the best. You know, in meetings, when we're talking about electric vehicles, folks are trying to say, well, let's give the farm workers used vehicles. That way they'll go, no. My farm workers deserve the best. You know, the best available technologies, the best available everything, right? Because they're putting down too much and getting too little to not get the best, right? And that's, you know, that's the basis of my work. You know, and always reminding the raza, the community that they value, you know, and that, I mean, without them, pues, ¿cómo la van a hacer si no hay comida, right? And not just that, knowing the history of our people, the braceros, they came in when World War II started. Why? Because they needed more workers to work in many industries, mostly agriculture, but also the rail, and also in Detroit, the manufacturing, right? Braceros were, I always say, braceros are the forgotten heroes of World War II and the wars that followed. Right? We're never given the appropriate value of what we've contributed to this country. And it's been huge. Y nosotros muchas veces calladitos, right? You know, and I wish we had more filmmakers to have those stories, to put them out there. I love the story A Million Miles Away. You guys see that one already? Mm-hmm. With Jose Hernandez. It turns out that he's my madrina's nephew. Caray, I feel astronautish. But it's, you know, we gotta always remind ourselves, and those stories, we gotta lift them up because they're not really lifted up. How do we demystify without the stories that can do it, right? The stigmas stick pretty hard, but it's up to us to do the decolonizing. First ourselves, right? And then the rest. But that can't happen without work, without organizing. You know, my whole dream is to really, you know, have the culturally relevant infrastructure that can set the stage to have the cultura really blossom. We're also going to be setting up 4,200 square feet worth of murals. That's going to be reminding people, I mean, who they are and what they should be doing. Kids reading books, el campesino por ahí, and, you know, so there's a lot of things going on. It's a lot of different pieces. It's a huge, it's almost like a complicated formula if you want to look at it that way, you know? And so, but you just got to piece it together, and I mean, es mucho trabajo, pero es mucho pensamiento también, because I didn't start thinking about this because I wanted to be mayor. I started thinking about this when I was a machista here on campus, you know, just being extremely observant. I took for granted what was happening back home until I came here and I seen it from a different scope. I started realizing, yeah, no, that's not right. You know, in '94, went back home, started the health fair in Huron. Been organizing ever since. You know, I came to Berkeley, found out there wasn't a health fair. I started the first bilingual health fair in Berkeley, a city that has its own Department of Public Health. ¿Sí me entiendes? O sea, it had to take a country boy from the valley to come to Berkeley to organize a health fair for all the raza de Aguililla, Michoacán, y Tepatitlán, and, you know, all my friends. That I was always come up on some free coffee. But, you know, all right, maybe we should erase that part then. But no, but it's just, you know, in terms of community, you know, I me sentía bien a gusto con toda la raza. You know, I'll miss Huron, you know, so I hang out with my folks over here. But you know, just the organizing and making sure you build for health, that you build so that the next generation has a better idea of what they can be. You know, we got to be able to do the things that inspire others and really have it be something that's tangible and that continues, you know. But I don't know if I answered any questions. But
So Clara, tell us what you were like when you were 10 years old and you were 15, right? First generation college students. What did you confront and how did you get through those obstacles and be able to do what you did?
So where I was going to take this is I'll build on the word that Ray introduced, which is observation and observant. For me, I think that I observed as a kid a lot of the things that I would consider now injustices and unfairness, right? I would see the way my people would treat my parents, you know, because of how they were dressed, or what they looked like after working in the field, or the type of car they drove, right? I would notice those things. I didn't have the language for it. I didn't know what it was that I didn't like, or why that felt ugly. Now I would say dehumanizing is what it was, right? And I had a lot of that anger. I still do. A lot of that rage inside of me, right? Because it eats away inside. So I think for me, I just observed. I saw a lot of little things. Maybe, we're talking about health. I had a tia that lived in the Leno, and when I was young was when they first started talking about the McFarland cancer clusters. And my tia worked in the fields. And I remember this was the first time that I saw water being bought to come to the house, because she thought it was in the water. Whatever was causing cancer was in the water. And so she wanted to make sure that nobody was exposed to whatever it was that she believed was in the water. That was the first time I saw us and our family buying water, right? And I didn't have the words for it to understand it. Like, what does that mean? What do you mean cancer cluster? Then I hear that it's a bunch of kids who were being born without limbs, kids like us that didn't have limbs and that had deformities, and it sounded like really scary stuff. So I think definitely there's a lot of observation, and sometimes this observation is done in silence, because who do we talk to? Our parents don't want to talk to us about it, or those are grown-up things, right? We don't really have a voice as young people. And so I feel like there was a lot of observation in silence, right? Or hearing the things, like I said, I remember being the translator. Like, I'm sure many of you do this too, right? Going with my grandma to the doctor. My grandma was beginning to lose her sight, and I had to translate for her doctor visit. And I remember when the doctor walked out, she's like, I don't know what they think caused me losing my eyesight. She's like, but I remember being out in the fields and the planes coming through and spraying on top of it. Y me caían en los ojos y los ojos me ardían. That was my grandma's story. But what do I do with that information, right? I was a teenager. And so I feel like for me, it was a lot of this seeing unfairness, feeling anger, not knowing where to direct that anger, right, at times. And I know that there were times when I would get mad, and I'm like, I would sit, I would lash out from time to time. But my lashing out was to like, why are we excluded? Why are we left out? Why doesn't anyone come to my house? Are we that poor that no one wants to come to my house? Or, there was now Pixley is predominantly Mexicano. But when I was growing up, when I was young, it wasn't like that, right? So it was always a challenge, like no one wants to come to the west side of town. Like, we're a little tiny town. We don't have like a real east side, west side, but yet we know the railroad tracks divide us. No one comes to the west side. Why? Well, because that's where the older houses are. The newer houses are on the east side. The white people are on the east side. The brown people are on, and there were covenants. There were redlining covenants, right, that I didn't learn until a lot later, even in the San Joaquin Valley, even in towns like ours, that prevented people from owning homes or living or renting in homes in certain regions. Yeah, just because of race. So I think that I would lash out and I would ask that question, and I would feel like wanting to defend, but not knowing what to do with it. So I feel like that's what I had inside. And I think that that's really what's really deep. We are good at observing. We know how we're being treated. We know how our families are treated. We know what's happening in our communities, and sometimes we just don't have a voice, and we don't have the power to speak up. And so I think that, for me, I think that's mostly what I feel like I experienced. So talk about my college experience. How did I keep motivated? I remembered all those things. I remembered I wanted to go home. I remembered I wanted those changes. But you know what? I also felt like being in the university was like a bubble. It was not the real world. And so there's like this disparity, this incongruency, that I'll tell you the truth, I was probably depressed for most of my undergrad and graduate life. And there were times when I would get reminded of the fact that I was different. I remember meeting some of my cohort members in my graduate program at Stanford who immediately made me feel like the object. Oh, you came from a farm-working family? That must have been really hard. I felt like I was under a microscope. That even made me feel further alienated. And so at times what I would do, obviously I focused a lot on wellness, partially because I needed it. But I needed to build a community that I felt I could trust and I could share these things, and sometimes it's really hard. And to be able to talk about the fact that this bubble is not the reality. If we want to address what we now call social determinants of health, because even growing up, that was not the language, right? That language didn't come till later. But if we want to address those, we really need to, think about wellness and be able to share it and be able to find the allies. But I'll tell you that I think I didn't come out of my depression, disappointment bubble until I was halfway through my dissertation. That I literally was walking on the streets of Palo Alto, and I was like, oh my God, I never noticed the flowers around here, and I never noticed the beauty around here, and I never noticed this or I never noticed that. And I called up a friend of mine and I'm like, have I been blinded by this fogginess of the discrepancies? Well, Stanford is also very, very different from the San Joaquin Valley, right? And from Pixley. So that's another layer, but just really realizing I'm doing this for this community. I chose to go to school part-time as a grad student and work at the health department at the same time. So I was working at the health department, doing some of these mapping disparities and having conversations, focus groups for the first time with community and saying, this is our data. Now we've lived this. You tell me what's going on here, because this is what we need to share with the health department and the people making policies for our communities. Right? So I was doing that, and that gave me a balance between being in school and still being in the work and in the struggle as well. But yeah, it was definitely a challenge. So finding allies, finding the spaces where you can talk safely about the discrepancies is really important.
By the way, footnote, I met you when you were in Palo Alto as a graduate student, and you talked about your struggles, and I thought, ella sí es una joya. This is just the person that we need. And I said, you got to keep going, because we really need you out there doing what you're dreaming about doing, and here you are. I feel so happy that you continue there.
Un aplauso para Sara.
Met, he was still working at a different university that I had been accepted to, and I turned down going to that university. So, and then had a chance to reconnect once you were up here at Berkeley. So I think that that's what was so wonderful too about being able to find people, but it's really hard to find them at times, and it feels very lonely. And when our realities are so different from the university setting, from what's being talked about in the classrooms too, right? The conversations are so different, it feels like there's this huge disconnect.
Okay, it looks like I have the pleasure of talking to you. Now, talking about this, it is really, it has been a journey to becoming a physician and be a lecturer here at Berkeley, and now running the center with the co-director and partners we have Nancy Garcia, we have Miriam Soria, we have Diego Montesino, Viviana, Cynthia, Cynthia que is new in the team,
Catherine.
and Catherine. Okay, Catherine no vino ahorita, tenía una clase. Okay. He's naming Catherine because Catherine is began with us to work in the Huron city, and she did possible that the mayor be here today. Probably she won't know, but let's give her an applause to es una persona yo la tengo muy alta estima, muy trabajadora, muy guerrera, y realmente estaba viajando de Los Ángeles a Huron, y con el sol que estaba haciendo, es a challenge. Hay que quererlo de adentro, hay que querer hacer el trabajo para ir allá y estar en todo eso. Pero bueno, yo les quiero hablar de lo que yo personalmente he vivido. Quiero especialmente enfocarme en los estudiantes de Huron, porque cuando uno está en ese tiempo, uno no sabe qué es lo que quiere y no sabe qué, y es más fácil sentarse y pensar qué hago yo aquí, ¿sí? Entonces toda esta gente está hablando y qué hago yo aquí. Entonces eso es una pregunta que les da en la mente, y bueno, yo quiero irme ya, yo quiero hacer otras cosas, ya yo quiero ir a jugar, y están en la edad y es importante. Pero quiero decirles que, como dije anteriormente, hace mucho tiempo estaba yo también de su edad. Y
Hace el otro día.
Sí, casi no me acuerdo. Bueno, hubo un momento mi familia yo soy también la primera persona de mi familia que tuvo el honor de agarrar un título universitario. Bueno, no agarrarlo, pero sí esforzarme por tenerlo. Y no fue fácil. No fue fácil por muchas cosas que mis antecesores han dicho. Es principalmente cómo creer que uno puede lograr llegar hasta arriba, lo que uno considera. Uno ve un doctor y uno dice, el doctor, la epidemióloga, oh my God, el alcalde, el profesor. Entonces,
el sol, gané.
Sí, tengo todos los puntos. Entonces, tú te imaginas y dices, yo quisiera estar allá, pero ¿cómo? ¿Cómo puedo hacerlo si todo el mundo me dice que bueno, tú no puedes, eso es mucho, por lo menos a mí, mucha gente en mi vecindario, pero tú quieres ser doctor, pero eso es una carrera que cuesta mucho, ¿quién te va a pagar? ¿Quién va a pagar todo eso? Ustedes no tienen mucho dinero. Esta niña a veces en un tono despectivo la propia comunidad, sin saberlo. Eso es una cosa inconsciente. Acuérdense, ¿todos están entendiendo español? Por favor, me dicen si no, y yo continúo hablando en español porque ahí me siento más cómoda.
Pero usted hizo la pregunta en español.
Entonces, sí, por eso. Entonces, déjenme decirles una cosa. La gente no lo sabe, no piensa que está hablando, que está diciendo, que te está poniendo, como dicen aquí en el inglés, dicen, it's putting you down. Ellos no pueden pensar eso porque han interiorizado tanto que la gente de abajo son pobres. Las novelas son una fuente de marcar la estructura, porque todos los de abajo sufren. Anita, la huerfanita, y pare de contar, yo no sé qué más, pero todo eso va calando, como decía Sara, en nuestra mente. Y cuando tú llegas y le dices a tu padre, bueno, yo quiero estudiar, yo quiero salir de aquí, quiero irme allá a Berkeley, en mi caso yo me iba a la universidad y tenía que dejar todo. Estuve perdida como 3 horas en autobús para llegar a la universidad. Nunca voy a llegar, pero bueno, esas son las cosas que era lo que me empujaba y a ustedes también. La manera de, están aquí resistiendo estudiantes de Huron. Yo sé que estamos hablando mucho y no están acostumbrados a que le estén dando una charla tan larga, a tener un día tan exhaustivo. Perdonen por eso, pero yo sé que esto lo van a recordar. Piensen nada más qué van a hacer en 10 años. ¿Qué vamos a hacer? ¿Van a estar casadas? ¿Van a estar casados? ¿Van a estar siendo profesionales? Todo eso. Tomen en cuenta lo que se les está diciendo porque es un mensaje importantísimo. Aquí nosotros tenemos gente como ustedes, aquí está Nancy, aquí está Diego, primera generación estudiantes, bueno, no Diego no, pero Nancy sí, y eso hay que tenerlo como un orgullo, como un orgullo. Entonces, ¿qué es lo que me hizo seguir? Bueno, imagínense ustedes, yo soy la mayor de 9 hermanos. Imagínense una mujer que tiene 9 hijos y no tiene nadie que la ayude en casa y mira a la hija mayor y le dice, tú cuida a este muchacho. Entonces tú dices, yo veía a mi mamá vuelta loca con todos los niños y veía a mi familia, todo el mundo tenía que casarse temprano porque eso es un orgullo. Ay, mi hija se casó, mi hija tiene los 15 años, pero yo veía para allá y veía, oh my God, yo tengo que cuidar a esos niños. ¿Qué va a ser de mi vida? ¿Qué va a ser de mi vida? Y veía, no solamente eso, sino que veía a mi alrededor, veía vecinos, y entonces el vecino llegaba tarde a la casa de la vecina y llegaba, tengo hambre, dame la comida. Y yo, no. Dice, no, no me digas la broma. Y yo no tengo nada contra el matrimonio, ¿verdad? Está bien, la gente se casa, tiene hijos, yo adoro a mis nietos, tengo 3 nietos hermosísimos que son el orgullo, ¿verdad? Adoro a mis hijos, pero yo no quería esa vida tan temprano. Entonces dije, bueno, aquí no me queda de otra. Yo le dije a mi mamá, mi papá era chef de cocina, y yo le dije, mira, yo no quiero cocinar, no me gusta cocinar, no quiero lavar, no quiero hacer nada de eso, yo voy a estudiar. Y así me dije, yo voy a estudiar y ser up my mind, pero también tengo que reconocer que había mucha gente de mi familia que me ayudó. O sea, no es un logro sola, es como decía el mayor, es logro de familia, porque esa misma gente que yo estoy hablando que me decía, pero esa carrera es muy corta. Yo tenía también un tío que me metió, o sea, me pagó todo un estudio de secretaria. Hasta me veía malagradecida, no en mi cara, pero yo le dije, no, gracias, yo voy a ser doctor. Entonces, llegar a la universidad, como dice, nosotros en Venezuela es otro estilo, la universidad es libre, puedes, aún en todos los gobiernos, en todos los sistemas políticos, todo el mundo puede, perdón, esa soy yo, perdón que me interrumpa a mí mismo. Una cosa, está hablando Catherine Dubón Portillo. Catherine, hola, estamos aquí reunidos con el mayor. Por favor, el aplauso que les pedí antes para entrar. Todo esto es también tu trabajo, así que te hemos honrado aquí ya 2 veces. Espero que lo sientas y bueno, te voy a dejar porque estoy hablando. Chao. Bueno, entonces decía yo, antes de la interrupción, que en verdad es importante escuchar a la gente, o sea, a nuestra gente ha sido, voy a decir una palabra que no es correcta, políticamente correcta, pero hemos sido como amaestrados a creer que nosotros no podemos. Hemos sido alienados totalmente. ¿Cómo vas a ser una doctora tú que vienes de un pueblito chiquito que ni siquiera aparece en el mapa? ¿Cómo vas a llegar a ser un mayor tú, que tu papá anda recogiendo lechuga? ¿Cómo vas a ser tú? ¿Cómo vas a ser tú que de repente vienes de Colombia? No nos has dicho nada, pero nos vas a tener que decir. ¿Cómo llegar a eso? Bueno, perseverancia. Y hay que ponerse una piel dura en contra de cosas. No hay que ser tan sensible, porque la gente viene y nos dice, aquí está Sara, ¿verdad? Ella es sensible, está mostrándonos que tiene sentimiento, pero, ojo, eso no es malo. Lo que hubiera sido malo es que ella se deje alinear por eso y no estar aquí sentada en este momento. Que eso es lo mejor. Así que esa es la cosa que nos impulsa. Creer que, ¿por qué esta injusticia? ¿Por qué yo me siento en una oficina de gobierno, y porque hay una mujer que me ve así como que si yo tuviera algo malo, como que yo no puedo hablar, o llega un señor, un doctor y me dice, ya va, espérese, yo estoy viendo y no voy a revisar, no me diga nada porque yo sé que es lo que usted tiene. ¡Epa! Esta que está aquí sabe hablar, esta que está aquí tiene cuerpo y es la que sabe lo que le está pasando. No es que el asma, en este caso que están hablando Sara y Rey León, es una cosa gratuita. Es que se nos impuso, se nos ha impuesto y se nos ha hecho creer que nosotros somos débiles. En el caso de los guaraos, se enferman, me decían. ¿Por qué se enferman? Porque ellos son débiles inmunológicamente. Y esa es la misma excusa que tienen para tratar mal a los latinos. Entonces, vamos de una vez, ustedes son privilegiados y saben lo que estoy diciendo porque lo están viviendo en carne propia. No importa, puede ser en Camerún, África, puede ser en Guatemala, puede ser aquí mismo en United States, aquí en nuestra comunidad en Oakland. Yo estudié en Johns Hopkins, una universidad prestigiosa, ¿verdad? Y yo veía pasar enfrente de Johns Hopkins, veía a los niños pobres asomándose ahí, como algo que estaba, como una pantalla de cine, ¿no? Y así pasaban y se asomaban y nos veían a los estudiantes, y si tú le decías algo era como que si los asustabas. No, no y no. Yo estoy aquí haciendo y poniendo mi granito de arena y tratando y luchando por cambiar este sistema. Cuando queremos recobrar la memoria y traemos aquí al mayor, traemos a Sara, a Sebastián, está Charles Bridge, está Carolina ahí, no estamos aquí solamente para dar un discurso, estamos para ayudarlos a hacer creer a ustedes que ustedes sí pueden, todos podemos. Y van a haber muchas piedras en el camino, pero tenemos que sobrepasarlas. Y la última cosa, antes que me digan ya está bueno, entonces es que nosotros todos tenemos ese potencial. Nunca dejen que la gente les diga que no pueden. ¿Ven? Si no pueden por la puerta, por favor, entren por la ventana. Pero necesitamos a ustedes como una generación de relevo. Necesitamos que estén aquí, no para decirnos que nosotros somos así. Es para ayudar cada uno. Venga, todos tenemos el mismo derecho y a todos tenemos que apoyar. He dicho.
Sí se puede. 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 ¡Se puede! ¡Sí se puede! ¡Se puede!
Sí, se puede.
¡Se puede!
Sí, se puede.
Se puede.
Ok, entonces sigo yo. Quería ver si Sebastián no quiere decir nada.
Sí, quería añadir, ¿lo sigo en español? ¿Ya que estamos
En español, en inglés, en chino, si quieres.
Spanglish.
No discriminamos.
No, en esa misma línea solo quería contar la última parte de la historia que conté de este small town en los Andes colombianos, y es, sí, people, I thought about it in English, so I'm just going to go back to English. So people were like very upset about this label being the most polluted town in the country, and it was really fascinating to see how it was actually the students of the municipality of Segovia who said, but what if we think about this label of living in the most polluted town of Colombia and probably South America. But why don't we tweak it? I mean, doesn't that mean that we are the town that requires the most attention from, the regional governor of Antioquia, the national government that needs physicians, because most of the physicians who were seeing the miners and people who were exposed to mercury around gold mining operations, physicians weren't believing people that their ailments had to do with, being involved in mining. There weren't enough physicians trained in knowing how to recognize and identify the symptoms of mercury intoxication. So these were situations that folks in the town were experiencing. The sons of the miners, the sons of the people who depended on activities who were connected to extraction. They were like, well, why don't we just repurpose this statement in a way that centers the needs that we have? And they actually started doing that. I mean, they started fighting back. They started demanding more attention, more funds from the national government. They sued the Colombian government for a more decided and more culturally and locally appropriate policy for addressing the exposure to this pollutant. And I think that's a good example of what Sarah was saying earlier. These labels very easily extend to individuals and they're very easily internalized. But it took this mindset shift in this group of students, and by extension in the mindsets of a bunch of activists that were accompanying the community, or miners themselves, who have been always told that they're stupid, that they don't understand that mercury causes health and environmental effects. So it took several years. It took many years of self-shame. It took many years of frustration and stagnation for a lot of these people to really tweak this label and repurpose it for their own interests. So echoing the role that you can have in your communities wherever you end up working. It takes that different mindset to approach things from a different perspective and open up more possibilities for action and transformation and a different way of being and existing. So anyway, that's the more interesting part of the story that I wanted to end to share, to end on a more positive note, because there's nothing natural and inevitable about the Fresno Valley or Huron being the most polluted place on California or the country. I mean, that responds to structural factors that were the product of decisions at different places, and by the same token, they can be reverted. And there's a lot we can do about that in our communities, in the spaces that we're part of. And I think we've heard fascinating and very touching examples of how that can look like. So it's up to you to take out that to lives and projects.
Okay, vamos a aplaudir a Vamos a conversar ahora, o sea, conversatorio, conversar, vamos a hacer preguntas, las preguntas que se les venga a la mente para los estudiantes de Huron, qué piensan de lo que estamos diciendo, y vamos a hacer un intercambio, contestar preguntas o experiencias. Si quieren contarnos la experiencia de ustedes, también se vale. Entonces, you can talk about your own experience, or you can ask questions about the stories that were said, or something. Don't be shy. Todas las preguntas son válidas. Aquí no hay right and wrong. This is a conversatorio. Entonces, conversando no nos vamos a juzgar. Ya hemos hablado mucho de estereotipos. Entonces, queremos que participen, porque ustedes van a ser los líderes mañana y bueno, ustedes van a estar sentados aquí, así que vamos adelante. ¿Quién quiere comenzar? ¿Quién tiene una pregunta? ¿Quién quiere decir algo?
I'd like to hear from any of the Huron students and the Huron folks, and because a lot of times when growing up in Huron, and it's like I said earlier, you can't take it for granted, until you kind of get exposed outside of it to see it from a different lens. You start processing it different. Me, I was always really quiet, You probably don't believe that.
No, I don't believe that.
I was the youngest sibling, of all my brothers and sisters, and I was actually 5 years younger than the youngest one. So I was like in my own little mundo, always very observant, ojos pelados, Till I got to Berkeley, es cuando comencé a I remember the first time I spoke up, I was all like breaking up in my speech and like, you know, but I kept doing it. Y después, you know, I started flowing and it started becoming who I was meant to be, you know. And so, so be comfortable being uncomfortable. You need to speak out because that's how you get your foot in the door to, you know, see the different picture that, you know, you're gonna need to learn so that you could build that dream, you know, that you gotta do, you know. So students, you guys got any comments? Sea lo que sea. There's no question that's a wrong question. Every question is valid, you know, and this has been a really interesting talk. And maybe there's something that probably sparked your mind and said, oh yeah, my mom told me this, or yeah, my tia said that, or that came in from out of town, or whatever, you know, there's something. There's gotta be something. And share it here because I think it's really important. You have a huge opportunity to have the discussion with folks that later on are gonna be your colleagues, you know, and I have faith that that's gonna be the fact. Somebody, anybody.
Well, I'm not from Huron, but I do want to thank you.
Oh, and Ruth.
Ray did invite me to come today, so those of you who don't know me, my name is Ruth Lopez, and I come from a small community like Huron, much smaller. He reminded me today. Also from the Central Valley. I'm also a Cal alum. And I just want to thank you, Ray, for like in everything that you guys talked about today. It's not about also empowering like the students here today, but like people like me. So I'm maybe like 10 years younger than you, but you're leading the way for people like me, just generations. Maybe not as young as the students here today, but you laid the groundwork for me to start my own organization in Central Valley as well. Right? We're creating these spaces, we're creating these opportunities that we can't do it alone, right? Sara's doing stuff in Tulare County, I'm doing stuff in Kings County, he's doing stuff in West Fresno County. And so it's together that we can make the difference because we can't do this stuff alone.
Right.
And so I just wanted to put that in there.
Thank you, Ruth.
Thank you.
Amy.
Huron first following, but I'm not from Huron, but I'm not a So what can students in Huron or any students that are like non-college yet, what can they do now to be fighting those cycles that you're talking about discrimination, about poverty? What can they start doing now in their communities?
I think volunteering, you know, and later on maybe it's an internship. But volunteering, there's opportunities. We have a community garden in Huron. We're doing some cool stuff already in that greenhouse. We got funds from USDA and we're working with UC Davis, our alum, and we're doing a study. I like to say that we're having a rooster fight, but there's no roosters involved and there's no fighting. It's a competition between industrial fertilizer and liquid organic fertilizer made out of food waste through anaerobic biodigestion process. So we're hoping that this shows numbers way better than the conventional, which is about 80% of it pulled from petroleum, right? And so that we could have an alternative. And if that is successful, then for me it's like, all right, well, let's try to find resources to build this operation, expand it, and employ farm workers, right? To do the organic, you know? And we're gonna plant more trees. I mean, there's a lot of things that we got planned that we want to do también. So there's always opportunities. You got an idea. If you have an idea, you want to do something in town. I'm your biggest supporter right here. You know, you come to the council and I'll get the city to back it up too. You know, whether it's through LEAP or through the city, I think what we don't have present yet is that youth voice that can engage at a different level. You know, and I like a long time ago I was helping out kids to do a skate park, and the city didn't support us. This was like early 2000, like 2000 exactly. The city didn't support us or the park and rec. And it's like we're kind of stuck, you know. It was me and a crew of 5 kids, and that was, you know, unfortunate. But I'm telling the kids today with skateboards and, you know, stuff. I said, hey, you guys should go ask the mayor for a skate park, you know, because really at the end of the day, the people coming through and asking for stuff, really it's power for me. They're providing me a lightsaber, and then you know, it's different than me requesting it from my colleagues. Big difference. You know, you guys see something missing in Huron, come and talk to the city council. you know? And even if you guys want to have an idea, you can even talk to Lee. You know, we're working with Victor Cervantes, awesome artist, you know, and he's going to be painting. And actually, there's opportunities because he's basically our artist in residence. It's not formal yet, but I'm going to do resolution. Our first artist in residence, Chingon artist from the Valley, from Lindsay. And this guy, you know, he has to have different engagements with students on a monthly basis. You know, you guys like art, or you want to learn art? You want to be the next muralist in Huron? You know, I mean, there's a lot of opportunities, but it all starts with one step. If there's no step, there's no movement forward, you know? So never think que estás enfadando. You know, luckily as a kid, you know, era bien enfadoso, you know? But that's how opportunities came about. And next thing I knew, I found myself in the space, you know, and, you know, I mean, a lot of things have happened, you know? Uno tiene que meterse, you know, and ask the question. Ask the question, you know, and if you're creative, you got ideas, también, put them on the table. Maybe it's something that we can support you on. Whatever hat it is, right? So I think that's where it's at. You know, just getting involved. You know, I think we need a lot of tutors in town. I think it would be a lovely thing to have high school kids tutor middle school kids. You know, the college kids tutor high school kids. You know, the data in terms of our school district, language arts and math, it's terrible. You know, the only way that's going to fix itself, because our teachers are telling me, yeah, it's like that all over the state. And I'm thinking, well, what's the solution? The immediate solution I'm thinking of, developing, empowering that cultural element of intergenerational support, right? Where we help each other. There's no tutoring in town. A long time ago, I organized what I called the Calmecac Study Hall. I was able to brainwash a teacher to come to this community center once a week to be there and tutor kids on whatever, you know? And so Calmecac means House of Higher Learning in the Aztec language of Nahuatl, the Mexica language, right? And then so we did that, it worked out. This is during the time that I had the youth group, La Raza Unida de Huron. All those folks have their familias, they got their education, and I was thinking, all right, out of these, one of them will come back to Huron, start organizing, y yo me voy, right? Our organizer's trying to always find the exit, right? But you know, you gotta organize your way out of there, right? Pero nunca, it just went too well, they never came back, got good jobs, así fue, you know? But that was a very successful program, and I started thinking about it, and then I ended up organizing Calmecac, shifting it, and called it Calmecac Academic Advancement and Social Awareness Program. So I connected with Berkeley, the School of Education, and they have an academic talent development program. So I was able to bring 8 kids from Huron for a summer. We sold tamales, washed cars at home, and over here they covered the tuition and the books. Then I talked to Vice Chancellor Padilla, who was always, when we were taking over buildings, he's always there, and this was a friend. He'd always call him a salad and stuff, but I was always respectful. I kept my cultura. I said, buenas tardes, don Padilla. Hey, ¿cómo estás? Bien. Aquí, pues ya sabes, en el movimiento. Oh, qué bueno, you know. And it was cool, you know. And so when I went back to him and said, and talked to him about the program I was organizing, he covered the room and board. So kids stayed at San Joaquin Valley. And some friends that were living there, they were mentors and they helped out. So boom, 8 kids going to Berkeley, 6 weeks. I didn't have a nonprofit. It was just La Raza Unida de Huron a la Brava, La Raza Unida Foundation, I would call it, right? And we made it happen. I didn't get paid. Nobody got paid. But the kids had an experience of a lifetime. So there's the power that you have is, ni saben, pero nunca van a saber si no lo tratan, right? Sin centavo, I did that. The health fair. Nobody would pay for anything. I wouldn't pay for anybody. Everybody else would have volunteered. I wouldn't charge the informational booths. You know, the clinic would come through. I would go a la Brava to Univision and everywhere. Yeah, that's where I started really building my, you know. So, and if you don't put yourself in the challenge, then you're not going to grow. Punto. That's what it is.
Well, a small response here. Talking about building on what Sara said about observation. When you observe a need, believe you could actually address it. There's someone I know who in 2nd grade saw a need among her fellow classmates for information. They didn't know what was going on in the world, so she started a newspaper in the school. In 4th grade, she found out that there were adults in her own circle who didn't know how to read. So she created adult literacy classes in 4th grade. You wouldn't guess who I'm talking about. La autora Clara.
Órale.
Pero no siga porque después va a develar otros secretos.
Hey, well, let me point, and me learning that the prison industrial complex was looking at the numbers, that if a child is not reading at 3rd grade level, by the time they're in the 3rd grade, they're already using that data and setting the beds in the prison industrial complex. So one of the first things I did when I became mayor, to the extent that I could, so once a month I'd have the mayor's, monthly mayor's read. So I get a bilingual book, a Chicano authored book, and I'll read it, in both languages, hablar, aconsejar, the kids. It was going pretty good, but then you get too busy, right? I mean, if we're able to empower, we also turn bookshelves, and Mayor Jenny, I call her Mayor Jenny, everybody calls her Mayor Jenny, later I see Mayor Mayor. But the alternate breaks, few generations, help me take old phone booths and make them into little libraries and paint them up. We get books, we stuff them in there, so that was part of the little literacy revolution. So I had a little Facebook group, y todo el jale. But you know what? Volunteers to help with that would be great. Empowering the kids and helping them so that they could, be more involved in reading. There's so much we can do. And I'm sure you got ideas too.
To get the skateboard park too.
Yeah. Well, those kids got to come through and then,
Ya, déjame tomar este break para decir, bueno, ya estamos casi por cerrar este evento, nos quedan como 5 minutos. Si hay alguna pregunta de los estudiantes de CORES aquí para que puedan hacer preguntas a nuestro panel. ¿Tienen alguna pregunta, pues? ¿O algún
pregunta, comentario? Y hasta Ruben, I'll open it up for Ruben too, an old friend right there.
My friend, I just had a question. They had to leave a little early, but specifically for Sara. So my friend was interested in your research, especially when you mapped the health disparities. So did you find anything maybe involving people who hold multiple historically oppressed identities, such as like Afro-Latinos, those who are queer, or maybe even belong to indigenous communities?
So at the time, think about this, like it's the first time we're even looking at race, ethnic, economic disparities and health outcomes. So at that time, we were just looking at really basic information. What we were finding is that there were certain pockets, right? Like, maybe near Pixley, out in Porterville, I remember little pockets, and on the north side too of the county. And really thinking about, okay, what is it about these communities that makes them unique? They're communities where there's recent immigrants, right? They're communities where there has been historically Black communities that had transitioned to being more Mexicano communities, but it's the Mexicanos who inherited sort of that disadvantage that had already been there, right? But definitely what it looked like for our county was around educational levels and new immigration levels. So I think that if you look now, you probably find the same kinds of things along different counties. Yeah, we know that there's a growing community of Oaxaqueños in San Joaquin Valley, and they're in isolated pockets at times. There are also immigrant populations, language and literacy, talk about language justice here, right? Material isn't translated for them often. Spanish is not their native language. So thinking about those are communities that are being overlooked. Yeah. And then think about, we're saying immigrants, but asylum seekers, refugees, anyone who has to hide under the radar, right? In order to just stay and survive, and so that they don't get sent back. Many of them because they know what they will experience if they go back.
Thank you. Tenemos otra pregunta.
I wanted to just add 2 cents on the question that you all have been interrogating, which is, how do you break that stigma? And everything you all said is true. I also think that when we talk about the problems, especially when we're the researchers, we have to divide up our time between the problem and the solution. So part of it is, we shouldn't be talking about a problem without offering the solution. And also, we shouldn't be talking about the problem without reframing who's responsible. So if you keep that in mind, and for example, with just sustainability, if people are on the bus because they're poor, that might be true, but they're also the ones who are saving the planet by being on the bus and not in the car. So we need to reframe that. If we're talking about regional transportation, and I'm sure the mayor says this, he probably credits the low-income community for being on the bus on climate, and puts the people in Fresno who are living in the mini mansions with 3 cars and get their Teslas on Front Street. So that's the thing I'd say is, let's not stay on just the problem, let's talk about the solution, and let's reframe not only who's responsible, but how our communities are the ones solving the problem. And that's how we break out of the mode where we just feel stigmatized, because the truth is we are the ones solving the problems.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
We've been ride sharing for a long time.
There you
Yeah.
go.
Aquí
Right.
tenemos otra pregunta.
What are the things my kids need to do in order to end up here? What are the steps? What do you guys recommend, since you guys work from small communities? I have 2 in Huron, so what do you think they should do?
I think that's a great question for some of the current college students.
Oh,
Things
yeah.
have
There we go.
changed.
I think that's better.
A ver.
My answer might be outdated.
Aquí tenemos 2 respuestas.
A ver, right here.
Okay.
Right here, right there.
Dice tu nombre, por favor.
Hola, mi nombre es Amali.
¿De dónde?
¿De dónde? De ahí, de the Empire. So
Oh,
like
alright,
I'm music
cool.
from Los Angeles.
Alright.
Yeah.
Alright, cool, cool.
I think
¿De
that.
Broly?
From where?
¿De Broly?
Probably.
The Broly? The Los
Oh,
Angeles?
Inland Empire.
Inland
I was
Empire.
thinking Empire, Imperial Valley, my
Oh
bad.
no.
Alright, yeah.
So my mom's a teacher, so that kind of helped me. My mom is first generation, so I'm second generation. But one thing that I learned a lot from my mom, which is like what you're doing for your children, is my mom, what she did for me was she really ingrained the idea of education. Like as a teacher, she really brought up like all of these issues from a young age. She brought up the fact that I'm a Latina. She told me her stories. She went to a college in LA and she talked about how as a Latina she had these issues, and she really showed me like the importance of like culture. And I think like for a school like Berkeley, at least from my experience, Berkeley I feel like embraces that culture if you let it show. So what I did in high school was I really got involved with like a lot of organizations that helped with students embracing their culture. I also worked like in a hospital, and I think that's where I learned like my passion towards like helping those that are like underserved. But I think that one thing that I would recommend, apart from like obviously like the rigorous classes and apart from like apart from the classes specifically, is get really involved in the community. Like Berkeley really enjoys seeing students share themselves, and Berkeley really enjoys when you have a passion. It's like I call it like a passion project.
Mm-hmm.
If you really share what you're passionate about and you start like building those connections and really like ingraining yourself into like things that you truly are passionate about, it really shows when you write these college essays. So I think that one part is like academics, and a second part is becoming really involved. And like your mayor has shared, there's a lot of ways that they can become involved. So I think like as a parent, it's really like sharing those like stories to your children, sharing the fact that we have to, unfortunately we are, at least I'm a Latina, so like understanding that there are always going to be issues, but coming forward and being like, you know what, it's okay, we belong in these schools. And I think that as a parent is what helped me from my mom.
Mm-hmm. Nice, thank you. We got one over here.
Sí.
I don't go there.
Y después Diego.
Hi everyone, my name is Abigail. So my parents were born in Mexico and actually in Veracruz and Michoacan. My mom, I think she just did elementary. My dad did for like middle school, and they really emphasized the importance of education. So when we came here, that's like the main thing that they wanted to focus for me to like be in school. I did my undergrad. I was a transfer student, So I really, really emphasize, starting in community college, you're saving that money too, and then transferring. So I transferred to UC Merced, and so those 2 years I was in the Central Valley, and it really made me realize the health disparities that I also saw in my community, but mostly now in a different area. But at the end of the day, really echoing what you said, being part of the community, I think volunteering in hospitals, in clinics. I was actually part of when I was in elementary school, it was it was called Nosotras en Control, so they gave a lot of information about reproductive health, a lot of those individuals that wanted to go to really emphasize going to for your college. Now I'm starting my master's here in Berkeley in the maternal, child, and adolescent health. So it's very wow, kind of going for a full circle, because I remember being you at one point, coming here to Berkeley, being part of these discussions, and really making me want to be part of that community overall. So.
Yeah, so my name is Diego. I've thought about this a lot, but I think what your question made me think of was what made me want to go to college myself, and how can I translate that? And I think it was when you come into college. When I came to Berkeley, the first thing I want to say is everyone here, everyone I've met as a student, is really passionate about something. They all have everyone here who's already taught, I know, is really dedicated to their studies or to something outside of school. They're part of clubs. There's my roommate came from the Central Valley. He grew up on a farm and he wanted to be a vet. I was really interested I'm really interested in research and in data science. All of these things. Everyone I've met here is really interested in something. And in high school, you don't really know. I feel when I was a high school student, I was I don't know what I want to do in college. I'm not really sure. But there's always when you're in school and you do a passion project, and you're hey, maybe I really like that, pursue that, right? You're a high school student, you're not gonna have some sort of crazy expertise, but follow something that you're really interested in, already, and see where that leads you, right? And I think the best thing you can do as a parent probably is just foster that, see if you can help them with that, advance whatever they're trying to do. And the second thing I wanted to say is, now, especially at Cal, there's already a lot of programs here that are meant for students, like everyone here, right? There's a lot of programs that I can't even really imagine just at Cal. There's the NAPCAL program, which works with high school students or come from marginalized communities, and will literally mentor them in high school, and it's basically a pipeline program straight to Cal. You're gonna get in basically if you're in that program. And then they set you up with scholarships, fellowships, research opportunities. I did that program, right? So there's countless other ones for companies, right? Companies are doing the same type of programs that fall under their lead. So yeah, that's it.
Thank you.
Awesome. Anybody else that can share their experience? Nancy?
Just really quickly, I know we're over time, but I just wanted to echo what everyone else has said. I'm Nancy. I'm a junior here at UC Berkeley, and it's been such an honor to hear this. But I would just say to any of the people in middle school and high school to just have confidence in yourself. Have the belief in yourself, the self-esteem that you can actually do it. It just takes the ganas. I hope that by the talk today, you have that ganas. I know I do. I have the ganas to do everything that I want to dream of, and it's because I have mentors and people that support me, and you all have mentors. You all have people that will support you, and you just have to seek that out. If that means that you need to go out of your comfort zone, if that means you have to join a club, start a club, just get involved and have the confidence in yourself that you can actually do it, because you can.
Yeah. Anybody else? Actually, we're pretty good on time.
Bueno, últimas palabras. No sé si Carolina quieres decir algo o... Ok.
Una sola cosa.
Ok,
So
una sola.
students, please don't let this be your last visit to Berkeley, just your first. Come back, come to school here, keep going with your dreams, and in 10 or 20 years, you've got to be up here. So please come back and visit us and stay in touch.
Yeah.
Sí se puede.
Bueno, todo es posible, por favor, no dejen, como dijo el mayor al principio, no se dejen, tenemos que lograrlo, tenemos que lograrlo porque no es solo para nosotros, ¿verdad? Aunque nosotros nos beneficiamos de nuestro esfuerzo también, pero es por esa gente que nosotros amamos con todo el alma, por nuestra familia, por nuestra comunidad, o sea, por toda la gente que no conocemos, pero que sabemos que están pasando lo mismo que pasaron todos y que están oprimidos, así que por favor, a todos vamos a seguir y vamos a lograr un cambio efectivo. Y a las mamás, gracias por estar muy preocupadas por sus hijos y bueno, le auguramos un buen presente. En nombre del Centro Crítico para el Estudio de la Salud de la Comunidad Latina, les damos las gracias, pero antes quisiera que toda la gente que trabaja con nosotros pues se pararan y les damos un buen aplauso, por favor. Carolina, Nancy, Miriam, Diego y Anaí.